no last-minute surprises to the injury report other than the main people that are already out.
Yep. Yes.
This team obviously places so much pressure on you at both ends, really, but offensively in particular, their three-point shot is such a lethal weapon. You've been talking about defensive transition issues. How important is that tonight, given what they do?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're a great shot-making team and can make tough ones. They're really gifted from that standpoint. Certainly probably the highest quality besides corner threes would be those transition threes. So with the way they play and their personnel, they have guys that are running to the line that can really, really catch and shoot. So, no different than any game. You got to get back in transition because those shots are really, really valuable. But, certainly with their ability to shoot the basketball, it makes it even that much more challenging.
Given your issues with the lack of depth, I mean, how important will it be for some of those young guys like Julian and Dalen to be ready for moments like this?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that with those guys. They've worked hard. I think some of the things we talked about yesterday about, where they can learn in terms of the stuff that they can control, understanding personnel, understanding schemes, really being detailed on those things. They'll make mistakes, they'll miss shots. That's part of it. But I do think there's things that both those guys can be reliable upon. When you talk about fouling, blocking out, rotations, those things where, they can be, more detailed as young players. And that's part of the learning curve for them. And offensively, they need to be aggressive. If there's shots there, they need to take those shots and shoot the basketball. But certainly both those guys will get, an opportunity to contribute.
Going back to the All-Star game, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on the criticism of the lack of competitiveness, and if you see that actually changing in the future, if this is just where it's at.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it wasn't like I watched a lot of it, quite honestly. But and I don't say that like in a derogatory way. It's hard. These guys play so many games, schedules condensed, and I'm sure there's a big component for them of guys not wanting to get hurt. You know what I mean? There just is, and I think when you talk about the loads on these guys, the pace of the game, which games are played, the number of possessions, I can see guys being somewhat careful in their own mind. I'm not, obviously there and in their heads and those kind of things, but certainly that would be something that would stand out. And I know the goal would be to make it more competitive, and make it more of a game where guys are really battling. But sometimes that may be unrealistic. I don't know what the answer is to that. I'm sure the league will take a deeper dive into that and probably talk to the players to figure out what can be done to do that. But I think that's like the number one thing, is I don't think you want to see somebody coming out of the All-Star break with a sprained ankle or some kind of other issue that puts them on the sideline, for their team, coming into the stretch run of, 25 to 30 games left in a year. It's a hard dilemma. I think the guys that are in the game, right, that are playing in the game are all highly competitive, great players, and they're all competitive. But in that situation, I can see, and again, I don't know if that's the reason why, but that would be the first thing that would come to mind for me is guys wanting to get through the game and make sure they're healthy going into the back end of the season.
And then when talking about just heavier loads on players specifically here, obviously a lot of injuries have contributed to DeMar's minutes, Kobe's minutes. What's your concern level just as far as sustaining that? And obviously DeMar's a guy who's going to do what's asked of him.
Yeah, and Kobe's the same way. The biggest thing I think is the fatigue factor. I think when you look at the fact that is the number of minutes putting them in a position where they're less effective or less efficient. And generally I think that happens for those guys when the minutes, not so much the totality of the minutes at the end of a game, but what's the consecutive minutes? And quite honestly, I have at times put those guys in some challenging situations, where I've played DeMar from, let's say, the 6-minute mark of the third quarter throughout the game, or I've done that to Kobe a little bit. Certainly I'm checking with them, and, Kobe's been great at times saying, hey, can I get a quick one here? And I'll do that. But I'm always talking to him about that, and I think they understand, for a guy like DeMar, he's coming out at 6 minutes and he's going back in, at the end of that third quarter, middle of the third, well, maybe towards the end of the third quarter. But sometimes that's a long stretch. But, I'll ask if he needs one. And, if he does, I'll give him one. And if he doesn't, I generally just go with him. But I think the one thing I've got to try to help them with is just the consecutive minutes and also how efficient or effective that they in those situations, and that's the challenging part. And then I think because of some of the depth with the injuries, we could have some lineups out there where, quite honestly, we could be very, very young and inexperienced. So sometimes leads and things can happen, or deficit things can escalate pretty quickly, and then you're forced having to fight your way back in. So just trying to balance it as best I can.
You mentioned Boston's lack of corner threes. Obviously, they're still efficient. They still get a ton up in spite of that. Is there something different about?
I'm sorry, lack of what's that now?
Corner threes.
Yeah, I wasn't even referring to the corner threes. They obviously take a lot, but I mean, they're efficient shooting the ball regardless.
Is there something different about the way they generate them, maybe compared to some other teams, just that they don't go to the corners as much rather than the...
Yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily the Joe would probably be better to ask that. Watching them on film, they have a great ability to hop up and make shots right in your face. Like, they can do that. So I don't know for them in particular if corner threes across the league is a higher percentage shot than above the break, but they're a unique team that I don't know if it necessarily makes that much of a difference for them. They're pretty elite shooting the basketball from anywhere behind the line.
Coach, here it is, 2024, and we're still talking about Al Horford. So, when you've had him, you've talked about him before, but I mean, every year he shows up, he contributes, he plays. And I'm not saying when you were coaching him at Florida, you thought he was going to have a 20-year career or close to it or whatever. But I mean, are you amazed that he's still plugging along?
No, not really. I mean, I think that, I was very blessed and fortunate to be around him when he was young, but I would imagine that he's probably still doing the same things now. He has got an unbelievable ability to impact winning and impact the locker room. And the one thing that I think everybody would say about him as a teammate, he's phenomenal, and there's no personal intention by him other than to win. I always tell this story when I was recruiting him. I'll never forget it. He was in an AAU tournament, and they lost in the finals in Las Vegas, and I was walking out of the gym, and he was in the bleachers crying, and I knew a guy cared when I saw that. But he is all about winning. He is really, really smart. He's very, very bright. He has a great pulse. He can tell you what's going on with every guy inside the team. He was great with me where he'd tell me, you need to talk to this guy a little bit more. You need to talk to this guy a little bit more. And I would imagine he's created that same kind of culture, in Boston. And there's a reason why they brought him back, when you're around him. He is a special player, and he's a special guy. Totally about the team, totally about winning.
Just out of curiosity, when you use that great anecdote in Cleveland about how you tell Joakim, don't touch that pot, he's touching the pot. I always do touch the pot. Same way you said Al wouldn't touch the pot. And you're obviously not being derogatory to the guy because you have such respect for him. What did you mean by that? Is he a rules follower?
No, I think what happens is, like, one of the things you're always trying to do as a coach, especially when you're talking about guys coming in as rookies or when a guy's coming into college as a freshman, they don't have a level of experience. So what you do is you try to give them experiences through watching tape or through your own personal experiences by communicating. Some guys have to go through their own experiences. Al was one of those guys that could take somebody else's experiences without having to go through the experience and apply it. That's where he was really, really good. He didn't need to touch the stove. He could really, really pick it up in a lot of different ways. And I think that's a credit to him because you can really, really, like, I'll give you an example. Like, I'll never forget it. He's obviously from Michigan, and I think Michigan State maybe had gone to the Final Four the year prior, and we had coming off winning a national championship, and those guys came back. And I asked him, I said, what do you think is going to be our biggest challenge this year? And he said, something? He says, just being back in Michigan, I think a lot of those guys at Michigan State just thought they were going to go back again. They did it, and our guys need to understand how hard it's going to be. And here's a guy that's never, ever won a national championship or has ever had to come back and try to repeat. And he's got great wisdom, being a young guy about what kind of mentality we need to have. I don't know how he got it, or why. I was fortunate, Al's father played in the NBA. Joe Kim's father was a professional tennis player. Sidney Green played here, was an NBA player. I had a lot of guys whose fathers were professional athletes, and I think that probably contributed quite a bit.